Hello learners, welcome back. So, today we are going to talk about digital revolutions in lecture 24. Now, this unit on digital media has been an attempt to capture changes and continuities in the digital space from multiple angles. So, today we are going to talk about digital revolutions and what we see in terms of, let us say, social movements, protests, etc., and how can we understand them. We will be using a particular case study to understand how digital revolutions shape in the internet sphere. So, an important debate among those who study political protest and violence concerns the role of social media in its ability to challengers to mobilize for collective action. Now, people who study protest and violence and social movements, they have emphasized on mobilization for collective action as one of the characteristics of a social movement. So, they are invested in trying to understand how the role of social media could be seen in this context. So, there have been a lot of developments in this regard in recent years with the coming in of social media, and millions of people around the world have become connected through social media, making it what these scholars would say is easier to mobilize for collective action. However, there are also skeptics who claim that the impact of these technological changes on movement success has actually been exaggerated, and that social media is not the game changer as it is often supposed to be. This debate particularly became intense in the context of the case study that we are going to discuss, which is the dramatic events which are known as the Arab Spring. Now, primarily the goal of this unit is to propose and empirically demonstrate two theoretical principles which will be carried forward in the discussion, where we think about politics comes first, that when we study the role of social media in collective action, we should think about politics always coming first, both analytically and chronologically, and politics comes first analytically because otherwise it is a mistake to attempt to understand the role of any media in any political process without thinking about the surrounding political environment. This theoretical perspective focuses on politics and the role of politics analytically, which means that social media or any media can play a role in the political process only when people have that political consciousness in their political environment. The politics comes first chronologically in that there is a rise in the number of extensive protests, which is actually more likely to precede the changes in the use of social media than to follow it. So, what this particular theoretical perspective argues is that for social media to succeed in leading to a revolution or a social movement, there has to be political consciousness first. There has to be some sense of discernment, some sense of awareness about an issue. Only then can social media play a vital role in that social movement or social cause. Now, when we think about social media and protest, the high level of interest and excitement about the impact of social media on collective action is seen as unsurprising. Unsurprising because we live in a digitized and social media world. So, the understanding is that it should have an impact. So, when we think of this new technology, it appears to be able to provide a movement with powerful, speedy and relatively low cost tools for recruitment, fundraising, distribution of information and images, collective discussions and mobilization for action. And these are the reasons why there is so much excitement, let us say, about the role of social media. And a lot of the existing literature deals with the role of social media in Western democracies. This present unit and study deals with the emphasis on, let us say, less democratic environments. There has been already many studies on Western democracies, and we did that module on digital democracy as well, where the idea that digital technologies, social media, etc., can play a very crucial role on the political processes. But how does it happen when we think about lesser democratic countries? So, the first considerable level of public attention to this issue was actually traced to what is often referred to as the Twitter revolution that took place in Iran in June of 2009. Now, in this, the Western news media were filled with reports of tech-savvy protesters who used Twitter, now known as X, and other forms of new media to organize and get their message out. Now, this was good for Twitter's branding because it gave it a lot of publicity. It is unlikely that this channel itself played a major role in those activities, as pointed out by scholars like Shetman, that only about 8,600 people in Iran were registered with Twitter at that time out of a total population of 70 million. So, what happened was that there was overemphasis on the role of Twitter on basically leading this protest, right. So, scholars would argue that this idea that it was only social media that led to the 2009 June protest in Iran is misleading. Now, interestingly, despite being an oversimplification, it is also helpful to refer to the two sides in debate as the cyber enthusiasts and the cyber skeptics. As the both names suggest, the cyber enthusiasts express optimism about the ability of new media to empower people, and they believe in the power of mass media and social media who live in non-democratic societies, and it also allows protesters, people who are against the regimes to adopt these new strategies. The cyber skeptics, on the other hand, they downplay the significance of the new technology, arguing that using the internet gives people a false sense of participation and keeps them from actual physical protesting. You can also see the influence of how the neo-Marxist thinking would perhaps be guided in a similar direction, because Adorno and Horkheimer, when they talk about mass cultural products, they too feel that the mass cultural products, mass media, they enable a false sense of citizenship and participation, whereas in reality there is no change possible when you are in a consumerist kind of society. So, for the cyber skeptics, they see the role of social media as also debatable. Now, some cyber skeptics have even argued that the new media actually becomes tools of repression. How? Because for them, they feel that social media becomes a way to do new kinds of surveillance, and therefore it enables new modes of repression. Now, within this debate, we have to think about the Arab Spring, which is primarily the case study that we are using to understand whether or not social media plays an effective role in, let us say, a digital kind of revolution or a social movement. Now, the Arab Spring starting in Tunisia in December 2010 till the beginning of 2011, covering North Africa to Middle East, was followed up by the world via social media. This was one of the times when social media was relatively newer, and the interest in it was guided from this perspective of following the developments in the Arab world. Now, the Arab Spring, it started in Tunisia, it continued with Egypt, where revolt ended with Mubarak's resignation, the then ruler, and the activists used new media, social media tools during the revolution, sharing it instantly among them and with the world. Now, the intrastate conflicts have killed millions of people, which is also documented in history, but the main reason of Arab Spring in Egypt was economic, but there was because there was a lot of crisis, there was unemployment, there was price rise, people were very angry and they were already very disenchanted with the regime. Now, the economic growth of Mubarak's government implementation for more privatization in 2000 only increased the income of the rich, and the unemployment rate even increased among young people. What you see is that the primary reason for the protesters to succeed was economic unhappiness even before they started using social media. So, the revolt starting with Tunisia, that was followed by Egypt, against poverty, inequality, corruption, unemployment and injustice, it affected other Arabian countries as well. Now, there was a circular movement in that region in terms of the revolution, because it spread from one country to another, and not just Tunisia and Egypt, but also Libya, Bahrain, Syria and Yemen. Now, the food prices had also increased to a substantial rate in Egypt, and more expensive food is also seen as one of the main reasons for why the Arab Spring happened. So, in 2010, cereal prices has increased abruptly all over the world due to weather conditions, and in other words, actually climate change was also seen as a reason behind the Arab Spring. So, wheat price had increased by 70%, and it is one of the core grains of low income families. What you see is that poor people were being impacted very significantly by the price rises, and hunger etc. were also prevalent. Thirdly, the political reasons also affected these countries, particularly Egypt, where you saw that there was a lot of instability, and research shows that instability is one of the main reasons why political revolts happen, social movements take place, and therefore, what was happening in this kind of a context before the use of social media and new media is that there was a lot of unrest in these societies. The young population here is also something that we should talk about, because the number of young people is high in the Middle East, but unemployment has remained a major problem. And what was also being primarily seen is that their unemployment meant that they had moved from villages to cities without proper housing facilities, sanitation facilities, etc. So, you see that the youth also were gradually impacted. Therefore, when we think about the use of new social media, other kinds of new media in this revolution, it becomes very clear that why was the youth playing a significant role in this movement. Now, another important factor affecting Egypt is also geographic and geopolitical reasons, where there was instability in neighbors, and also how there have been civil wars and conflicts historically. So, the cost of living itself was rising because of the risks in the neighborhood and that entire region. So, what you observe is basically cyber skeptics laying out particular conditions, particular context in which the revolution was already brewing, right. So, you see financial, you see geopolitical, you see young people's crisis, and rates of unemployment being high, inflation etc., which means that the conditions for any kind of social political revolution were already there. When we historically understand movements and we see how regimes have been overthrown, be it in the West or in South Asia, we see instability, we see economic underperformance as very important reasons. And the idea that the neighborhood itself was also very unstable, that was playing a role. So, except Saudi Arabia and Qatar, almost all other countries in that region were seen as susceptible to something that happened in Egypt. So, both Tunisia and Egypt, they are also homogeneous countries in the Arab world, and Egypt has a long history as a populous and urbanized country. It is not divided by tribe, and Muslims in Tunisia and Egypt are overwhelmingly Sunni. Now, this also plays a role in bringing people together in terms of a social identity and overthrowing the existing regime. What differentiated Egypt from other Arab countries is that Egypt was not like the other countries in terms of its army, its tribal organization. It's more urbanized, it's more organized. Education level is also higher, which plays a role in elevating people's political social consciousness. So, this revolution had a great impact all over the world, especially in other Arab countries, as there was a circular impact, and people became scared of losing their power, and the autocrat monarchs, they also began thinking about their regimes. Now, interestingly, what one also sees is how primarily the impact had unfolded. For instance, Kuwait budgeted $70 billion for state employees and $3,650 per person to basically think about not having a situation that had unfolded in the rest of the countries. Bahrain distributed cash to families. Saudi Arabia increased salaries by 40%. And you can also see that $10 million to Bahrain and to Oman was to be paid, and $4 billion to Egypt to help the neighboring countries to stabilize their political status. You saw that there was a ripple effect because of what had happened in the Arab Spring. Now, Saudi Arabia invested in Egypt to stabilize the country. And this revolution, although it happened in a very predominantly Muslim country, was not like the Islamic revolution in Iran. Now, the Tahrir Square revolution differed from the Islamic Iranian revolution because they were non-violent and also in many ways non-nationalistic, and the common aim was to bring the Mubarak regime down. How primarily this was carried out was through social media mobilization. The main principle guiding this revolution was also that one wanted a civil democratic state and not any other kind of law. So, Egypt has been seen as a civil democratic state, and the most important difference between Egypt's revolution and previous revolutions was the use of social media technologies. This investment on new communication technologies, it also decreased the price of mobilization for the people. An affordable and easy access to social media was available for Egyptians because the state had expanded Egypt's information technology to achieve socio-economic development. So, what people had was also free internet access, cheap computers and extended internet centers. And with these incentives and investment on the new communication technologies, social media Facebook users increased to 4.5 million, which consisted of 21% of Egypt's population in 2014. So, you see a clear trend in the rise of the users of social media. Now, at the end of 2019, according to the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology of Egypt, the ICT indicators showed 45.2 million internet users. When first launched, only English blogs was possible. However, with the Arabic language internet in 2009, Arabic software, Arabic blog numbers also increased. Arabic software encouraged the creation of more blogs because you could have domestic local narratives and Arabic speakers contributing to these issues. And there was also a possibility that primarily you could have more democratization and circulation. So, one sees that even in a non-Western democracy or a non-Western context, you see different ways in which these ICTs work out. Not only was the Arabic version of internet the only factor, but investment in communication technologies to use social media via mobile was cheaper. Blogs increased, activists started using these communication tools. They could communicate through Facebook, Flickr, Twitter, cellular phones, etc. And this initial support via social media like Facebook was in April 2008, where Facebook supported also different kinds of protest movements against the regime. Now, what also it showed is how the social media mobilization and role was primarily very unique, as mainstream media or classical media was hesitant to do so, and that is also because there would be more censorship and control on what would be seen as the older media forms. Now, social media was used massively, and the world could also follow these protests via social media, first via Twitter, and then it was followed also by some forms of traditional media, which captured the way that these protests were unfolding in the Middle East. So, you see that parallel to the increase in social media users in Egypt, there was also an increase in activism. So, here the cyber enthusiast would like to argue that you do see a correlation between social media users and activism. The Egyptian revolution basically saw the protest between January 25 and February 11, 2011, which led to the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak's resignation, and it showed that social media could affect social movements if the mobilization happened effectively. And the officials also tried to block out the internet during this revolt, and they refused to admit the blackout in subsequent interviews, etc., where any kind of censorship and control was also denied. Now, the state wanted to shut down internet completely, and it ordered to be done so, although many state officials actually did not accept this blocking. Interestingly, you see how the bureaucracy also operates at multiple levels, from the central to the state and the local, and what you see is that there could be frictions within these bureaucratic setups also. It has been argued that many state officials were also themselves against Mubarak's regime, and therefore, they did not participate in the commands that were being laid out. But one can see that the internet in early 2010s played a significant role in a very non-Western context to create ripples of social change. Now, a detailed report of the internet blockout in Egypt is actually given during the revolt days, especially on January 27 around this time, and it lasted for more than 5 days. The government trying to black out the internet succeeded in doing so, but this did not stop the young Egyptians from protest till the resignation of Mubarak had happened. This is also an interesting way to think about a social media space where there is resistance, there is censorship, but the protest had already started and it continued. Now, the most popular social media pages of Egypt revolution, one of them was this Facebook group called We Are Khalid Said, where a Tunisian uprising, it started in December 2010, and a campaign followed by protest, We Are All Khalid Said page on Facebook was created. This Facebook page actually was created for this young man named Khalid Said, who was killed by the police, and he was an owner of an internet cafe, and he was killed because he refused to give the bribery to policemen, and he was beaten till death and left in the streets to die. The police collected the body, and his family was reportedly told that he died after choking, but this Facebook group became very popular as part of the revolution. Now, although this Facebook group page was mainly about the death of this one young man, in the beginning it became a center of political discussion, Egyptians' oppression by Mubarak, and the group number expanded. His death became a symbol. The internet websites were with basically discovering and talking about how the young man was not just one person who has been killed, but it represents a larger democratic issue, and primarily the idea that this regime was oppressive. The second also was a Facebook page which was named El Baradei for Presidency, who basically used internet to communicate and share information with his followers. And as compliments to El Baradei's personal Facebook page, his followers of Twitter account and other supporters also formed pro El Baradei Facebook pages. So, you can see that it was evolving as a form of resistance, and he was one of the opponents of Mubarak and primarily regarded change as inevitable in Egypt. One sees that there were conscious attempts at using these social media pages to create a different idea of, you know, a different Egypt. The third is this Facebook, Twitter and YouTube page of Omar Afifi, who was a former Egyptian police officer, and he wrote a book about avoiding police brutality. Now, his book was banned, and you know, primarily because it was again seen as against the regime, but he posted all the details about gathering places, what to wear, and you know, all of it in this Facebook page. And young Egyptians were following this new media. They basically also, you know, captured a lot of these instructions from this particular Facebook page. Then you also see the presence of bloggers like Nawara Nigam, an Egyptian female activist and blogger who posted a video of an Egyptian actress and wanted to offer encouragement to Tunisians. She also saw how, you know, the social media space could be used to communicate with her followers, including phone numbers to support activists. And in one way, activism was seen as a noble act, and the idea was that there needs to be resource sharing amongst activists, etc. Then there was a January 25 Facebook page where 3 teenagers created the final victory page, as they called it, on January 25, and it had a video addressing the public, explaining the achievements of Tunisia and what would follow them in Egypt. So, the activists addressed millions of people via these pages, and there was a lot of sharing of what happened in Tunisia, how they achieved victory, and then how they would carry it forward in Egypt. What was also primarily impressive was this impact of social media, where in main media there was, you know, a blocking of communication, and you know, there was a lot of state repression. On the other hand, on social media, you found that there was a newfound space where, you know, the youth voices were highlighted. So, what one sort of sees through this example of the Arab Spring, and if you want to know more about it, I would suggest that, you know, you read up on it. One sees very early potential of social media in creating and organizing a movement through these new technologies. However, at the same time, there were a lot of debates about whether it was social media or the socio-political disenchantment and the instability that already existed, which led to this digital revolution. But nonetheless, you know, scholars may agree or disagree on the impact of social media in terms of, you know, either leading the movement or succeeding it in ways where, you know, it was primarily a success. But what is also undeniable is that social media entered into that space, and it became very difficult to ignore the digital space and social media as tools of you know, communication. So, you may agree or disagree with the fact that social media was responsible for the Arab Spring and its success, but what becomes very non-deniable is also the fact that somewhere these digital tools of communication become really important to think about the digital democracy, the political you know, shifts that are happening in many contexts. So, when we did that unit, when we did that module on digital media, so when we did that module on digital democracy, I had highlighted how these new technologies play a role in creating the new kind of public sphere, and the Arab Spring sort of highlights how that happens in a very different context from a Western democracy. So, it was possible to share information about what was happening in the Middle East via social media with the world even when maybe other forms of what would be seen as traditional media were trying to block that information with the state support. So, what one sees is how information became more democratic primarily through this flow from one point to another. So, through this module I have tried to highlight how we can look at the role of social media and digital platforms in bringing about social change or revolutions as they would be called, in particularly context where there is some sort of social and political disenchantment as well as let us say dissatisfaction with governments and regimes. What one sees is this interaction between users who also express their collective anguish and frustration together, and the mobilization happened spontaneously because people decided to adhere to how they thought about the social media bringing them together. So, this is all for this lecture and I will meet you in the next one. Thank you.